So we've been working on this podcast for a year now, and in the last 6 months, we've started to put the content out online. I thought it'd be a good time to sit back and analyze what we've been working on, and kind of just see the progress that we've had, because we've got some videos that have some pretty good views, some that have kind of flopped, and we've kind of just had a little bit of chatter before we started recording about some of the things that are mentioned in the titles of those videos that potentially could be why it's not working. I think it'd be good to kind of think about what we wanted from this podcast 6 months ago, where we are right now, and where we would like to move with this podcast. And has this become more of a responsibility for us? Because when we initially started, we kind of had the idea of like, this should just be like a very casual conversation every week. And now we're like, okay, we have some good data. We have some good concepts for episodes. Maybe we should double down on those, but they require a little bit more pre-work. I would just love to spend the next 30 minutes talking about this. George, how do you feel about the podcast?
Well, as you know, Jamie, today I feel very tired about everything, as we all do. But yes, no, on the whole, like this is one of the things in my week. If I was arranging things into like things that I have to do but don't really want to, and things that I blah blah blah, this always goes down to something that I want to do and that I enjoy. And it's just like, it's fun to have skin in the game after pontificating about YouTube online for all these years. So overall, I feel really good, but I think it was kind of interesting, and I suppose it's partly the reason why we're talking about this today in the way that we are, where it's like, we had a few ideas for topics that maybe we could talk about at the start, but then we started maybe second guessing ourselves a little bit about some of them and thinking, oh, actually, hang on, we're kind of aware that people don't necessarily respond to X type of content, and so should we be making it, if you'll pardon the pun. But I think that in itself, that even...
Clever, very clever.
Thank you very much. That's the best you'll get out of me all day. But the fact that we were even having that thought and that revelation, I think marked an obvious shift in our mindset towards this thing, because I think at the start, we wouldn't have thought of it in that way. And it's interesting that we've never, like you said, we haven't yet sat down to discuss, is this changing direction at all? Or are our opinions or how we approach it changing? But I'm excited about that as well, because I think ultimately the kind of scattergun approach is fun at the start, but then starting to look at the data and starting to, approach it more tactically, this will be a fun phase, I think. So I'm feeling good. Gwilym?
Yeah, the way I've been approaching it is it's a bit like going for a walk every morning or something. Like sometimes you don't feel like doing it, but you know that it's going to feel good when you're doing it and after you've finished. And that's generally how it always feels with the podcast. I never finish recording feeling like, oh my God, thank God that's over. It's always like, oh, that was invigorating. And it's also nice, just like going for a walk, it's also nice knowing that it's essentially good for you. You're doing something that is getting you somewhere, essentially. And yeah, it has been really nice having skin in the game, having almost like our own experiment that we can test our own titles and thumbnails and consult with one another. So yeah, on a meta level, it's upgrading my YouTube skills, because we get to talk about things in a way that we don't usually. Like we do talk about general like tips for YouTube in WhatsApp and in person, but you don't get as much from that as you do from saying which title should we pick, what should the thumbnail look like. So yeah. Yeah, I'm also very tired today. So we started off with we were like, we're going to record 2 episodes, and then I think my reservation was, I don't feel like I've prepared enough. I have a channel I could talk about, but I don't have this list of cool stuff I can say about it. Therefore, is it legitimate to start recording? And I think that is a definite shift from what it was like earlier on, when we were just like, we're just going to record and chat. Whereas now it's like, I need to have something to say.
Yeah, I mean, like the initial inspiration when I thought of the idea for this podcast was Ali and Tamer Abdul. They have a podcast called Not Overthinking, which I've listened to for many years now. And I like it because it's just very relaxed. It's bare bones. It's like, let's just turn on the camera and just start talking and have a catch up. And I thought that would be kind of interesting to have, in the creator world as we're building our creative businesses. And I think like the first at least 10 episodes were very much that. It was kind of like, what do you guys want to talk about today? And we would just pick something and that's what the next 40 minutes would be about. And we would then, find a thumbnail and a title for it and put it out. And I definitely think that we've now put out, 16 videos. We've got a couple more in the bag as well that's still being edited. And so we've put out a variety of content now. We've got, the YouTube focused videos. We've got how to get hired, how to hire, how to start a newsletter, how to write a course, how to sell your course, characteristics of what makes YouTubers go viral, analyzing YouTube channels. Like we've done a lot of different concepts on this channel. And I think we've had like a lot of different success with each of those formats. And now it's got to the point where it's like, we could carry on doing what we're doing. We could just turn up and keep talking about whatever we want to talk about every week. But you do limit your growth in some way if you don't reflect. And I think in our last podcast episode, which is the characteristics that make YouTubers go viral, one of the things we spoke about was how people who are action biased and who work with speed get the ball rolling very quickly, and they start to see momentum on the channel, which is good. But eventually that kind of character trait can then work against you if you don't sit back, relax, and analyze the work that you've done and then pivot your strategy from there. And I think we're at that stage now with the podcast. And it's like, okay, we have 4 videos, a month? Is one of those concepts just us analyzing YouTube channels that are doing really well, breaking it down, and that's valuable to people? Do we have one episode that is more creator business focused? Do we then go and get guests on other YouTubers and we interview them and we have more of an interesting conversation and leverage their audience to help grow the YouTube channel? Like there are so many different things that we could do going forwards. But as Gwilym said, you then need to prepare. You need to have notes. You need to think a little bit more about what you're doing. Because I definitely relate to that in the sense that the episodes where I knew what we were going to be talking about, even just like a few hours beforehand, I was able to write notes and the episodes came out much better compared to just turning up and talking. And so I do think us sort of creating buckets for our content to fit in, preparing for them ahead of time, will create for better episodes and faster growth, but it might take away some of the fun. How do you guys feel about that?
Having some structure can be good and fun. Especially if you know that it gives you good results. So if every month we know I need to come up with a channel that I'm interested in and like 5 talking points about it, that seems still on the fun side of the spectrum rather than like a task that needs to be done. For some reason, this is making me think of, I was recently playing some multiplayer games with some friends for the first time in years. And we started off, so against other people. And we started off just kind of going gung-ho, whatever, and we just got shot to bits. And then after a while, we were like, we need to formulate a strategy. And then after we'd done the strategy, everyone knew what they were doing, and it was a lot more fun because you were getting results. And yeah, this is similar. I think if we have a little bit of a strategy going in, it'll be more fun. Because I don't know about you, but the main kind of or stress feeling comes from the uncertainty of what we're talking about and will I have something to say.
Yeah, and I think it probably, even if we do have those buckets, it's like you say, on one hand it means you're kind of actively looking out for things throughout the week. Say it is for YouTubers that are doing well and we want to talk about, but it also kind of like with my one way that I got really consistent with my tweets, and that what made tweeting feel like less of a chore and that I wouldn't worry that I didn't have anything to say, was that I had like set days where on so like the weekend already taken up with a pre-newsletter call to action and a post-newsletter call to action, as in the newsletter's coming out tomorrow, sign up. The newsletter came out yesterday, here's the article. And so that's like, okay, now it's only 5 days I have to worry about. And then breaking those 5 days down into 2 days are YouTube related, 2 days are script writing related, and 1 day is like business related. Suddenly it's like, I've only got to think of 2 YouTube insights this week, and like, only 1 business insight. And so that made it feel like there was always, I felt less like I had nothing to say. And so, yeah, maybe if we do go down that bucket route, there'll be a kind of similar effect in terms of like thinking, oh, cool, I just had a reflection on this particular thing, which we always talk about once per month. Let me just write that down, because then I can bring it up in the one episode we're going to do this month about X thing or whatever. So I think we've hit on something there.
Yes. So, and on the other side of it, I don't want to fall into the trap of getting more serious about something to the point where it's not fun anymore. Because, once you start taking something seriously and thinking, I want to get something out of it, it suddenly becomes a question of, is this thing a good return on my time investment? And then you can start comparing that thing to other things you might be doing with that time, which is not how I want to think about this, because I just want to keep it fun. I think we've seen this happening with enough creators, right? That they start upgrading their business, they start putting more time and effort into thinking of it as a business. Like you mentioned with Mike Shake, George, to the point where it's like, oh, is this like my stuff anymore? What am I doing with my time? What would that look like for us? What would going too far look like potentially? Question for the floor.
It's a good question for the floor. I wonder if it's like one of those things where you kind of don't know until you go too far, and then you have to overcorrect, like I had with the agency. But I think that's certainly a good initial litmus test, is like, how do we feel every week when it comes to sitting down? Because I know how I feel about certain like calls that end up coming up in my calendar time and again, and that kind of dread gut feeling that you end up getting. That will be like the initial litmus test. But then as well, I suppose this speaks to a broader question about like where we see this thing actually going overall, is like, if it starts to feel like I'm having to crunch to get the prep work done for something like this, and so that I still feel like I'm not giving my best self on the episode, and meanwhile I'm impacting other stuff that's going on in my business. But I don't know, we're at this kind of point where it's not, this obviously isn't like, a major revenue driver for us yet, and we'll come on to a bit of stuff to do with that in a bit. But it feels like there has to be some give and take. Like if we want this to become something more than it is right now, like way more, it feels like we would potentially have to try and reduce some of the other stuff that we're doing in order to make space for this. Because I think one of the big mistakes it's really easy to make when you run your own business, and especially in this kind of industry, is just stacking up little extra things. You think, oh, that'll be fun. And before you know it, you're exhausted.
I think it probably comes down to the types of series that you would end up picking. Like if you end up saying, okay, once a month we've got to do a certain type of episode, but it's a heavy lift, there's a lot of things in it, then it's like, I've got to spend time preparing. I'm not enjoying this. Oh, I don't have time. It's taking me time away from other things. I think the reason why this podcast has worked for us so well is, for the most part, it's an hour and a half of our time every 2 weeks. It's not a huge issue, right? It's like on a Monday, 11 o'clock, we turn up, we have a chat, we move on. And sometimes we do prepare beforehand. But I think depending on those series that you pick, it's like the whole 80-20 principle, right? Like you could just plan a very small amount, and that's going to help massively with the actual episode. Even just like this conversation, we lightly structured it for like 3 minutes before we hit record of like, these are some things we should talk about. This is the order it would probably make sense to go in. That immediately is way better than, so what do you guys think about the podcast? And then just having it, kind of flow and go wherever for 40 minutes. I also think that there's like a couple of other things that you can do to help compound like how much fun you have making this podcast, incentivizing you to do it. Because I like to think of like the projects that I work on, of like the whole Tim Ferriss thing of like, if I was to fail at this, would I improve? Would it still benefit me in some way? And I do think that the podcast is like, yes, like I get to see you guys every couple of weeks, get to talk about everything that you guys are working on, which is interesting. I get to learn from you guys. We also have the benefit of having clips and tweets that are based on what we say in these episodes go out. So that helps with Twitter content, even if it was short form, and that could go onto like your Instagram and TikTok. And so this 1 hour then can end up helping build other things. If we end up getting guests in, it's very good from a networking perspective, because now there are other people that we're speaking with on a potentially, bi-weekly basis. Plus, this is consumed by a lot of people who could become customers and clients. That benefits other areas of the business. So to me, it's like this is only like an hour and a half every 2 weeks that we spend, but it's very valuable because of how it helps in these other areas. And I think going back to what Gwilym said, it's like, we're sharpening ourselves here because we are thinking more about it as a creator. Sure, we work with clients, but the clients, the YouTube at the end of the day is the one still in charge of where that car is going. We can help influence it, but we're not really driving that YouTube channel. Whereas here we are in control. We are thinking about the titles, the thumbnails, the hooks, dealing with sponsorships. So we're learning a lot about that entire process as well without a client being involved. So to me, like all of these things at the moment are fun. I enjoy it. And I think that there are a lot of benefits that we get from it. And I don't think that anytime soon, even if we did start to structure the podcast a little bit more, we would lose that spark, or at least I wouldn't.
Yeah, I think something else that I like is that I don't see anyone else doing something quite like this, where it's a group of people in the creator who actually work in the creator economy with different clients all coming together and talking about what the processes are like. So you've got say like Colin and Samir talking, and they are basically like a media outlet talking about the creator economy and their own creator journey, but they're not kind of, they're not like freelance kind of people working. You've got something like Backstage Careers run by Jeremy Merry, that interviews people who work behind the scenes in the creator economy. But you don't have yet, that I know of, a podcast like this, and that makes it more exciting for me, partly, just knowing that we have a unique value proposition.
And I think as well, the fact that we spend time with YouTubers who are like building these projects that, take years to reach any sort of level of recognition and then can continue to grow just very slowly over years. I think having exposure to that makes the whole process of doing this feel just intrinsically more relaxed, because I have this a lot at the moment. Well, not a lot at the moment, but there are like a couple of people who keep kind of emailing me saying like, I need someone who's going to be able to like blow my channel up now, and like they haven't even started, and they sound so like desperate to make this thing work right now, and I feel like it misses the entire point of what doing YouTube is about. And having that exposure to seeing people growing slowly and like that being totally okay. Like someone even, in my life said recently, it's like, I think I'm so impressed by the fact that you guys kind of sit down and like do this podcast every week without really any definite intention of like where it's going to go, and no definite ROI. You just decided like, I'm going to commit to this. And it's the same with writing a newsletter for free and putting hours into doing that. But I think, again, like I said, the exposure to seeing other people doing that, the more times you do things like that and you see this kind of long-term return on investment, cool, but also, like you were saying, Jamie, all those kind of compounding component advantages that just happen along the way. I think it makes this whole experience actually really, really quite relaxing and fun, versus I need to blow up now and I'm stressed about it,
Let's talk about some of the things that you want to come from this podcast. What are some goals that you have?
So I think part of the enjoyment of doing it is that there are no specific goals, that there are no specific outcomes that I'm really wanting. It feels good in the same sense that I don't know, again, going back to sports metaphors, like maybe going running just because you enjoy the running is somehow feels good, and you might even be suppressing in the back of your mind, I want to like increase my VO2 max or whatever, or become healthier, almost because you want to focus on the enjoyment, because you know that is what's going to keep you going more than the abstract idea of what am I going to get out of this. So I'm almost resistant to the question, but I can see a future where it helps us get more clients. It makes it easier to launch products. We get to talk with cool people we wouldn't otherwise maybe talk to because they come on the podcast. We get to talk about things that we think are important. I can't think of any like pressing political or like social issues in the creator economy right now that I'm burning to talk about, but I'm sure they will pop up. Things like that.
I like that you answered that question that way, because it was almost a trick question to see if you actually had a goal, because there's a great book by Scott Adams. I forget what it's called, but in it, he essentially talks about systems, not goals. It's called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. It's a very good book. And it kind of goes back to what I mentioned, 10 minutes ago around this can still be considered a failure, but we would have benefited in many other ways. This podcast for me is very much a system in that we are coming in here, we're putting in this input of an hour, or a bit more with the title, thumbnail edit and whatnot, but we're getting way more in terms of our output from this podcast. And we don't need a goal. We don't need to have 1 million subscribers, 100,000 subscribers, $50,000 a month or whatever. We don't need any of that stuff because we benefit in other ways just because this is almost a system. And, there are these things that are not necessarily a goal, but it's, for me, at least, it's kind of like, oh, that would be nice to have. That would be kind of cool. And I've always said to you, like, one of the things I think would be quite cool would be to go to like a VidCon or Vid Summit and have like a live, like a version of the podcast where we're on stage and we're talking to other people in the industry. I think that would be like a really cool thing to do in person. Like that, if you want to call that a goal, like that's the only sort of thing I have for this, but it's not like this metric, like I want to hit this many views per month or this many subscribers or revenue. And so yeah, that it was a bit of a trick question to see if you'd have a goal in mind.
Tricky.
Tricky boy. You've always been the trickiest of the three of us, Jamie. I don't know what that even means. No, I on that kind of idea, like that's kind of where my mind went as well, where like, although there's no metric specific goal, I love the idea of one time us three coming together at Gatwick Airport, and we're like, because we've got to fly somewhere to go and record something and doing not like a tour, not like I'm ever expecting that we'd be like doing a, but just being able to go and
I mean, that would be awesome.
Yeah, it would be pretty
sick. Like an 8-stop worldwide tour of making it.
But yeah, just something like that, where like this just becomes a slightly more fun version of what it already is, and like you said, bring more people in, and if that meant we got to go and see interesting places at the same time, and I don't know, just it should be a kind of adventure, and I think that's the image I have in my head. Maybe that plane is taking us to Vid Summit or somewhere else. Maybe we'll all be on the same plane to Vid Summit this way. I don't know. We'll figure that out.
I actually do have one other thing.
Yeah.
Which I thought would be like interesting. I don't know if it's a goal, but I think it'd be very cool for us because we have, we're getting a bigger audience now. We know we've seen some of the people who watch this podcast, and they're quite big, whether they're a YouTuber themselves or someone who works in the creator economy. I think it would be really cool for us, like in like January next year or even this summer, to just have like a 5-day creator summit sort of thing where we just rent out an Airbnb in like the French Alps. We go skiing in the day, and then in the evening we just hang out, we all talk, and we teach each other what we know. Like I think that'd be such a cool way to have like, the Making It Summit or something where every year we just invite all of our friends in the creator economy to like one place and hang out. Very good for business expense as well. A good excuse to get on a plane. Like that would be kind of a nice of a goal to have as well.
That would be cool. Yeah. It's like what you were saying about that book, Jamie, reminded me of this book, Finite and Infinite Games, with the idea of finite games being like you're trying to get to something like money, for example. I'm going to finish building Amazon, and then I'll have a pile of money, and then I can do other stuff. Whereas infinite games are, the reward is that you get to carry on playing. And yeah, that sounds very much like what we're talking about, is we want to carry on playing at maybe a higher level. And that's made me think, I know I do have one specific goal, that I'll be happy when we hit is when the podcast is profitable enough that it entirely covers the expenses of any editing, thumbnail designing, and potentially someone like for half a day a week, like managing the podcast. So handling all the uploads and descriptions and things like that for us. That would be great.
That's like the biggest nuisance of this whole thing is the uploading and whatnot. Yeah, having that whole process automated would be amazing.
So yeah, once we get to that stage, it'll be even easier and more fun. So that'd be cool. And so if you're listening and you are somehow interested in helping us with thumbnails, and helping us like in spending like half a day or something on uploading or things like that, get in touch.
So then in terms of things that you think we've already improved, we've spoken a lot about where this thing started, where vaguely we'd like it to go. But in terms of this kind of midpoint, or hopefully not midpoint, early on point, what do you think we have managed to improve? What things have we kind of smoothed out since we started recording nearly a year ago?
Okay, so I think one big upgrade is that we've assigned episodes to one of us. So it's not like, oh, who's doing the thumbnail for this? No one knows.
Except it's Jamie, because it's always Jamie.
Except it's always Jamie in the old days. Now we've got a system where it's George, Jamie, Gwilym, George, Jamie, Gwilym, handling the episode each time, which there have been a couple hiccups, but I think we're getting there. I think that was a wise move. More I don't think we've gotten better at packaging our episodes. I think we've been at a similar level throughout. I'm definitely noticing it's been useful looking back and watching myself, because I haven't done that much stuff on camera before, and now like seeing myself talk, I get a lot of insights on, my God, I speak like 20% slower than I thought I did, and that's just can be annoying, and I guess it's giving me pointers on how to speak to camera in future.
It's because you're the chilled member of this boy band. You're like the relaxed one who everyone thinks is like, yeah. Hey. But no, that's a really useful point. I don't think I've had those sorts of insights on myself yet. I should. So, except that I know, like, I sort of like move my chin side to side when I'm not talking. So I'm like with like a sort of vice now, holding it absolutely firmly still.
Oh no. It's a very, useful insight there. I mean, what I would say is very similar to Gwilym. I think when we first started, there was a lot on my shoulders in terms of managing my editor, sending it over to you guys, thinking of titles, thumbnails, and uploading everything. And yeah, I think we're definitely at a point now where a lot of it has been automated or delegated amongst us three. Which I'm very thankful for. That's why I think like some of the early days of the packaging was just like a bit rushed because I had no time ready for it. But yeah, I think we're in like a really good position now. I think we're, like Gwilym said before, I think we need someone who can take like that final little bit from us, where they deal with all of the uploading and descriptions and whatnot. Once that is done, I think this is perfect, right? Like it's just you turn up and you talk and we hang out for an hour and that's it. Like that's the dream world for the podcast, in my opinion.
We haven't discussed in-person podcasting. I mean, we kind of have, but
yeah,
it would be nice to also do at least one in-person episode. It's like a normal episode in London sometime.
Yeah, we should go to the place where we took all of the photos that we used for our thumbnails and the channel banner in Hackney, I think it was. Just like rent that place out, get on that sofa that we were on, record 2 episodes there, and then just like invite some Londoner guests along and have an in-person episode. I think that would be really cool to do. We should do that because we keep saying we should do it, and we never pull the trigger. But again, it's because of those things of like, it's just sort of like thrown out there. It's not sort of like delegated to one person. If we had that, then there's like almost a project manager who's going to drive it forwards.
Yeah, be cool.
Maybe we should just, spin the wheel and see whose name it lands on, and they're in charge of sorting this out.
So earlier in the episode, we mentioned the idea of, like covering our costs, driving potential revenue through this as part of our overall businesses at some point. And so maybe this would be a good time to talk about sponsorships. I think the initial point for me, which is really interesting and something that I almost couldn't believe when I first heard about this like a year ago, is that we are, openly, candidly receiving sponsorship opportunities already. And this is something that when I was working with Justin Moore on his new podcast called Creator Debates, I remember he got that podcast sponsored before it had even begun. And that to me was kind of a little bit mind-blowing, because I was like, oh, okay. And even once it got started, it does okay, but it doesn't get like hundreds of thousands of views or even tens of thousands of views. And it was getting consistently sponsored kind of from the get-go. And so I vaguely hoped that maybe something like that would be possible with what we're doing here. And thankfully that's been something that has already started to come up for us. So I'm curious really to ask you guys kind of what you see as being the goal of what we're doing with sponsorships. I think it'd be interesting to talk about our kind of non-negotiables when we've had our discussions about like who we would want to take on and promote as part of the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. To touch on why it is that sponsorships are coming in, I assume it's because we are part of a fairly niche group of people who want to get better at YouTube, provide YouTube services, etc. We are talking mainly we're talking about our experiences with clients who have hired us. And so we capture a kind of fairly niche audience. Even though we get maybe like about 400 views per episode now, I'm consistently surprised by kind of the level of the person who says, "Oh, I watched your podcast," and so I think that does explain why sponsorship offers come in. In terms of non-negotiables, I think so. The obvious one is that we all need to use the thing, the product, the service, whatever it is, because I think promoting things when you don't use them is the beginning of the end, right?
I think just in verifying that we know for sure, like, okay, well, we use it, and therefore we are essentially the target audience of the people who we want to watch the podcasts, or people like us, and so we therefore think that you would also find it useful, kind of thing.
Because if someone says, "Oh, Gwilym or George or Jamie recommended this thing, I tried it out, it's not so good," not only are they less likely to trust us again in the future if we recommend something, they're also going to downgrade their opinion of us. Like, oh, Gwilym uses this slightly shitty thing where there's a better alternative, or like, why is he not clued up about this stuff? Why is he recommending stuff when he hasn't even done due diligence? So I think that's just a terrible idea.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen YouTubers who do that in the past, and I'm a fan of theirs, and so I have respect for them and I trust them with their recommendations. And when I've seen that creator deviate from that path and essentially chase money, and I use that product and it's not good, I do think, do I want to trust them again? They're saying they use this thing or it's amazing, but it wasn't amazing. In the future, I'm less likely to believe in what they're pushing. And I think the benefit that we have as well is that this isn't our, income source. And I don't think it will be our main income source. We are 3 individuals of our own businesses that do very well in a completely different area in the creator economy. And I just don't think we will ever be in a point where we will sacrifice our values and principles and kind of say, yeah, but we need the money, or let's just take it. I think that we will always promote things that we use, and sort of bring it on to our second point of like all 3 of us agree to it, because all 3 of us can use something but still not want to promote it. And so if all 3 of us are like, okay, that's interesting, let's look more at this opportunity a bit closer, that's a good sign. But I think it's one of those things where if someone says no, the opportunity kind of gets thrown out until the next one comes on.
I'm really glad that actually that's how we went, because I remember when we were first discussing like, oh, what are the rules of this kind of 3-way partnership that we have? And my first instinct was like, oh, I guess if it, you know, like majority rules, if two people like something, we should do something. But then I think maybe he's come up in this podcast already, but Tim Ferriss's whole thing of like, oh, reputation is like really hard to build, but really easy to destroy. And I think if the majority decision carried through something that one person thought, no, this could actually wreck me, then that's totally not fair. So I think the one person veto is a really valuable thing for sponsorships and for kind of like everything we do basically. And then I suppose the third thing that we have also agreed on is that we basically, you know, enjoy working with the people that come to us, because like you said, Jamie, this is not our main income source, and what we don't want, and again, this comes back to what we talked about at the start, is any way that we can minimize loading this thing that's supposed to be fun for us with additional stress that we don't need. That's super valuable, and it's often very clear from the kind of first interactions with somebody how easy the relationship's going to be. And I think we're very fortunate that those we've spoken to so far, like, all tick that box. And that's a big thing, really, just for keeping that stress level down.
Yeah, because a big realization I had that I, for some reason, I hadn't really thought about before we started looking at this is if you add up our time and how much we would typically charge by the hour to do consulting calls or work for someone, and then you compare that to how much time we spend getting, doing negotiation with a brand, getting set up to film the ad read, discussing our strategy and pricing, and you add up all the hours that we spend discussing that, it becomes questionable. And this is actually a question for both of you. It becomes questionable whether we should actually even be doing it unless we're charging what might seem silly money for a small podcast. So, yeah, I guess another question for the floor. Is it a strategically good idea to do sponsorships? And I'll say my bit, which is that it is if we're promoting something that we genuinely really like and that would be useful for people, and because that's in a sense good content, but we could do that without being sponsored, so that's not a really good answer. So maybe the real answer is it advertises the podcast as being open to sponsorships and gets our reps in terms of what is it like doing a sponsorship, getting it set up, and I guess preparing us for when the podcast gets bigger in the future. I don't know. I'm not really convincing myself almost.
I think this is such a classic, and this is, again, it really helps having worked with Justin for so long on sponsorship stuff, is that it's so easy to convince yourself that doing sponsorships is in some way shady the more you start to think about it, and that there is no inherent value in doing it. And you kind of wind down this path to the point where you think, well, I guess ultimately it's because it will help us eventually break even on the podcast while also doing a good thing for our viewers. But I think that ultimately, like, the goal of what we're doing here, making this podcast in the first place, and really what anyone should be doing, I guess, when they're making content, is they're trying to provide something for their viewers, whether that is entertainment or education or whatever it is. And in our case, we're trying to educate people. We're trying to, tell people about the experiences that we've had so that they can do better things for their YouTube channels. And partnering with sponsors that I think we sincerely use and really like, and that we couldn't function without, that is just another wing of that same, of achieving that same goal, essentially, is, we are connecting you with a brand that we really, really think you will use. And hey, not in every case, but in a lot of sponsorship cases, you'll also get it for cheaper than you would get it somewhere else. And so if we can sort of like reframe the way we think about sponsorships as like a win-win-win for, it's a win for the sponsor because they get more customers. It's a win for the viewer because they get put in touch with a product that they will love, that, hopefully at a rate that is less than they would otherwise have to pay. And it's a win for us because it helps us keep, run like the operating costs down of what we're having to do to facilitate that whole kind of loop. It just becomes easier to see it as something that's worthwhile, I think. So that's why I think it's worthwhile doing, basically.
Yeah, in my brain, I'm not to be difficult, but in my brain, I'm comparing it to a segment of the podcast, non-sponsored, where we talk about tools and things that we are enjoying recently that would be a lot less work on our end, but would still fulfill the task of letting our viewers know without us spending a lot of time on the back end sorting out all the stuff and getting things verified for an amount of money that may or may not be worth that time investment.
But maybe that brings us on to one of the other things we've spoken about in terms of having long-term potential, ideally, with the sponsors that we're talking to, because you're right, there has been a lot of kind of upfront effort for some of the stuff we've worked on more recently. But I guess the point is we've now, with those people that we're talking to, we kind of established the relationship, we've set the ground rules, and we've now got all the assets, and then all we have to do is kind of rinse and repeat them. And so it's kind of like a lifetime value of the sponsor type thing, would be how I would see it, because you're right, the upfront hours that we've had to put into some of these earlier partnerships would definitely not be worth it from a pure ROI perspective. But I guess it's that kind of long-term mindset that ticks the box for me, at least. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the podcast, of us literally just talking about the podcast. If you're interested in what our lives look like outside of the podcast, there is another episode with these two guys discussing their extremely long work days, which you can check out right here.